Many of you have been taught by your English teacher when you receive an argumentative prompt to simply put each side of the argument side by side, left and right. But this method that I've been teaching you and that the whole department is supposed to be using and wants you to implement actually encourages you to organize your essay by point rather than by passage. Because if you have one body paragraph discussing one source and the next body paragraph discussing another source, you are going to get a low score on the FSA. They want to see that you can integrate these sources together and come up with points, and that's how you're organizing your essay. So the following is going to be how you should have organized your planning sheet this week for those of you who still didn't quite get it. So please follow along as I go through this. This is for the lowering the voting age passage. Answering correct. So if you look down at the bottom of the page, it's should the voting age be lowered? Okay, once you've identified the prompt, you're going to move to your planning sheet. On your planning sheet, copy the prompt down. Should the voting age be lowered? Then you identify the topic and point of the prompt. So the one thing that my essay would be about, it should be just a couple words, maybe one word. Sometimes in some prompts it might be a few words, but it's going to be the thing your essay is about. So in this case, it's the voting age. Okay, so I'm going to circle that blue to indicate that that's the topic. And then the point I have to make about it is should it be lowered? That I'm going to underline red. Okay, so now I have my topic and point. Now I know on the FSA you're not going to get colored pens in order to do this, so I would just do this with regular ink. But we do it this way in class so that you get used to the method and you remember that you need to include a topic and point in your essay. And then of course when I grade your paragraphs, I always color mark it as well. That way you can see what elements you have and what elements you are missing. Okay, so after you've identified the prompt, topic, and point, you're going to, so if I'm saying should the voting age be lowered, I'm going to repeat that back as an answer. The voting age should or shouldn't be lowered because blank, and that's where I would put my reasons. Okay, so that's all you have to do with a prompt is just reverse the question into a statement, a complete sentence. Now you want to double check yourself and make sure that you have the topic and point in your thesis statement. The reason we double check is sometimes we have a two-pronged prompt where they ask us to do two things. And in that case, we would want to make sure we have everything we were supposed to have in there. So in this case, there's only one thing we have to discuss is should the voting age be lowered? Okay, so we know we have voting age, which is there, so we're going to circle it blue. And then we have that it should or shouldn't be lowered because. So we have all the elements of our answer in there. All right, next you're going to come up with your thoughts on the prompt. You always want to do this before looking at the passage set because any ideas you have, you want to remember, because once you read the passage set on the FSA, usually they're so long that you've forgotten any ideas you might have had. And you don't want those authors' ideas to fill up your head before you can develop your own. So you're going to set up an area for your thoughts. So you just literally write my thoughts. And because this is an argumentative prompt where there's two sides, you could say, yes, the voting age should be lowered, or no, the voting age should not be lowered. You're going to want to come up with what you think are going to be reasons for both sides. That way you have those thought up. So I'm going to divide my thoughts in half by just drawing a line down the center. Okay. Reasons why it should be lowered. And if I'm thinking up these thoughts myself, I might say that the outcome of elections affect teens as well as adults. So when you elect a governor, they influence like the educational process and how much funding schools get, so that does affect teens. A lot of these things, I know teens are in favor of medical marijuana, so that vote that went through affected teens as well, even though they were not able to actually vote in that election. So because the outcomes affect teens too, maybe that's a reason why we should lower the voting age. Another reason might be because politicians might be influenced by teens being able to vote. If you're able to vote at 16, maybe that would cause the governor or your local politicians to focus more on matters that concern teenagers, like education. Okay, so that could be a reason. And then maybe the people who want the voting age to be lowered would argue that teens can be responsible. Certainly, teens who go off to Harvard or go off to these great schools, they had to be really responsible in high school and make sure they were earning a high GPA and make sure they were following, all the steps they had to in order to get into these schools or to be successful. So there certainly is a large majority of teens who can be deemed responsible, and a lot of them are left at home alone for the weekend while the parents go somewhere with a sibling. So that's definitely a reasonable argument. For not lowering it, I want to come up with some reasons as well. So maybe if we do lower the voting age, these teenagers won't think for themselves. Maybe their parents are just going to tell them how to vote, and these teens will go along with it. Certainly the most influential person in your life might be your parents, and they influence your political beliefs. So if you've never heard any other argument and you haven't gone into college or into the world yet where you start developing your own opinions on these things, it could be that just parents who have kids get more votes than people who don't have kids, because their kids will also vote whatever their political beliefs are. So they'll be just imitating their parents' beliefs. So that could be a reason not to lower it. You could argue that teenagers might not know the issues. You hardly ever see teens watching the news or, keeping up with these things. Certainly adults usually have a better grasp on the issues than the teens do. So you could argue that. And this is just something I thought of. They may vote on the cool factor. It might be when voting for a president, they aren't voting for who's most qualified or who has the best plan. They might vote for the guy that seems most hip. And, maybe not all teens will do that, but that's certainly a possibility. Now that I have my own thoughts written out, and certainly I could have more, like this isn't an exhaustive list. If I can come up with more, then certainly I would write more out. But you want to try and come up with something for both sides so you have ideas that are your own. Now, I'm going to create a graphic organizer. These were the sources I was given. Now, there's no titles on these sources, so I can't, say what the name of these articles are, but they do have authors down at the bottom. It says who wrote these, so Lawrence Steinberg and David Davenport. So when I create my graphic organizer, I always want to put the sources across the top. So I'm going to have the sources side by side vertically, and then whatever points they're making are going to be horizontal. And that's so that I'm tempted more to organize my essay by point rather than organize my essay by source. So here's what I mean. And those are the authors' names right there in case you didn't see them. On my graphic organizer, I will simply just put the author's last names because there was no title, and that's usually easier anyway. So I'm just going to put the author's last names to say the left side was going to be Steinberg's ideas, the right side is going to be Davenport's ideas. I'm going to divide up my paper. Now, I'm not looking for just any ideas. I need to answer this question of should the voting age be lowered. So on the left side, I'm going to be looking for reasons why it should be lowered and reasons why it shouldn't be lowered. So I have for lowering the age and against lowering the age. Of course, that means the voting age. But I want to be clear with what I'm looking for when I write this on my left side. I'm going to divide my graphic organizer in half so I know that those things are going to be split up. Bullet points as to what should be under the Steinberg column, either for lowering the age or against lowering the age. So after I read, this is what I came up with. He said brains aren't fully developed in teenagers, and that's against lowering the age. Now, he said it as in other people will say this, and that's not necessarily his belief, but there is something there against lowering the age, that the brains are not fully developed. He also said that those people believe they're impulsive and hot-headed. Teens are impulsive and hot-headed. Then he goes on with his own reasons. He said a 16-year-old can weigh pros and cons and reason logically. That any bad, deliberate choices they make actually occur just as often in adults. So when they have time to really think things out, they usually make the same types of decisions adults do. Voter turnout is better in countries with a lower voting age. And this could create steady voters because of that information he provided at the end, saying that there's evidence showing that if you vote the first time you're eligible to, you're more likely to cast ballots on a regular basis in the future. So after reading this, he said that teens lack civic knowledge, that there's no new reason as strong as during Vietnam for changing the voting age, that the argument then was if you're old enough to die for your country, you're old enough to vote. Brain develops even in the mid-20s, which is something that was also said on the other side as well. The drinking age was raised from 18 to 21. So almost in every other area, things are being raised. The age in which you need to be before you're allowed to do these things are being raised, not lowered. In terms of for lowering the age, he does admit that the other side thinks that it could increase voter turnout, even though he doesn't believe that's true. He doesn't really follow or provide any information to support that belief. So those are the reasons he came up with. My next step is to group alike reasons. So right off the bat, I see that two of them are kind of the same on both sides here. Voter turnout better in countries with lower voting age and could increase voter turnout. So I'm going to make sure to connect those as I circle anything that's alike. Now, what I'm writing on the side, it says can reason as well as adults. Like obviously those first two bullet points were similar, where it says 16-year-old can weigh pros and cons and reason logically, and bad deliberate choices occur just as often as in adults. So in my own words, I'm going to say that they can reason as well as adults, and that's kind of a broad way of stating it. And I want to say something that's going to have to be proven whenever I'm grouping these together. So my statement shouldn't copy exactly whatever the author said, because then when I provide evidence, it's like saying if I said that teens can weigh pros and cons, and then I go to quote Steinberg, the most I can say is that teens can weigh pros and cons. I'm just repeating myself. So whatever my claim is has to be something that I need to prove, and I can prove that they can reason as well as adults when I say that they can weigh pros and cons. So make your statement provable, whatever it is, that it needs to be proven and it's not just repeated in the evidence. So for the next one, voter turnout is better in countries with lower voting age. It could create steady voters. Could increase voter turnout. I'm going to say it has a positive impact on voter turnout, and that leaves it kind of open to interpretation. So in order to prove this, I would say that it's creating steady voters, that more people will go out to vote, and those all indicate a positive impact on voter turnout. So this is more of a provable statement here. If I look down at the bottom, brain's not fully developed, impulsive and hot-headed, those seem to go together. It's all talking about their mental capacity here. So I'm going to say they're intellectually incapable. And that's how I would frame my statement. And then I could prove it by saying their brains aren't fully developed and they're impulsive and hot-headed. On the other side, lack civic knowledge, didn't really have anything that can be grouped with it. But if you noticed when you read the article, I already phrased this one in my own words. The article specifically said that they don't know, They don't know how to amend the Constitution, and they don't know who their senators are and things like that. So I already summed that up by saying they lack civic knowledge. So I don't need to restate that one. Now, the next one doesn't have anything to go with it either. It says there's no new reason as strong as during Vietnam. If you're old enough to die for your country, you're old enough to vote. So when I rephrase that, I'm just going to say that there's no compelling reason to lower the voting age. And then I could then discuss why we lowered it the last time. The next ones can be grouped together. Brains develop even in the mid-20s, drinking age raised from 18 to 21, can't serve in military or on juries. And what I could say is that history has taught us that important decisions should be undertaken when you're older. Okay, and that's because brain develops even in the mid-20s. So they raise the drinking age. They say you can't serve in the military or on juries until you're 18, which I think, I'm not positive on this, but going back to early American history, I'm pretty sure during the American Revolution that there may have been some male teenagers fighting alongside everyone else who was fighting. So it could be that this is a fairly new idea in terms of history. I'm sure there were teenagers even back, during Rome who were fighting for their country. So history has taught us that these important decisions need to be saved until you're older. We certainly don't do things at the same age that we used to in history. We do them at a lot older of an age. Which side I'm going to take. Now, I might believe that the voting age should be lowered, but when I look at the evidence provided to me, I only really have two reasons why it should be lowered, whereas there's at least three as to why it shouldn't be lowered. So when I go to choose what side I'm going to be on, I'm going to pick the side that has the most evidence to support it, even if that's not really my personal position. Okay, so I'm going to end up going with the side that says be lowered. So when I move back up to my thesis, I'm just going to circle shouldn't. No, they shouldn't be lowered. Now, I have the because, and I can give my reasons. My reasons are already listed, though, below. Remember, I wrote them on the side. Okay, so I don't really have to fill that in. That's just there to remind me that, yes, I do need to have reasons thought out. Now, this doesn't sound like a really great thesis statement. The voting age shouldn't be lowered because, and then listing off my reasons. That's called a pronged thesis. And actually what we found is on the FSA, the essays that score the highest are open thesis statements, where they just say the voting age shouldn't be lowered. Of course, they say it in a fancier way than that. And they don't say why. And then as you read their essay, you discover their reasons. That's actually a stronger way to build your argument. If you say everything up front, like these are my three reasons, and then you go back and say them again and explain in more detail, it kind of sounds repetitive and formulaic, and they want you to move away from that. So a more open thesis statement would be better. So I'm going to flip my planning sheet statement, the better your thesis is going to be. So I'm going to say, while advocates of a lower voting age argue that voter turnout would increase, because that was their main reason, right? This tenuous possibility is not enough to justify lowering the voting age. And of course, I'm saying tenuous there to kind of demean the other side a little bit and say, like, well, I mean, they could argue voter turnout would increase, but, that's just a possibility. We aren't even sure that would happen. And it's not enough to justify lowering the voting age. So I would want to make sure that I have my topic and point in there. I have my topic, voting age, and then the point is that the only reason to do it is not enough to justify lowering the voting age. Okay, so it is clear what side I'm on. Next, I'm going to come up with my three reasons. And if on the FSA you can only come up with two, maybe you chose the wrong side, but also if you wrote two really strong body paragraphs and came up with a 4-paragraph essay as a result, including the introduction and the conclusion, two really strong body paragraphs would be better than having two really strong body paragraphs and one mediocre body paragraph. You do not want to throw in a weak body paragraph. So make sure that if you find you're stuck and you can only come up with two reasons, and the other side doesn't have any more reasons than that, then try and build two really strong body paragraphs and don't try and throw in a weak third body paragraph. But these are the reasons we came up with on the other side. thinking of it. I also said teens lack civic knowledge, and history has taught us that important decisions should be undertaken when older. Okay, so as I look at this, I think that when I start discussing teen voter advocates don't have a strong reason to lower it, I really should probably have already said that teens lack civic knowledge and that history has taught us that important decisions should be undertaken when older. That way, when I discuss they don't have a strong reason, I'm also building on the fact that there are strong reasons against it. So I'm thinking the one I listed from my paragraph 1 should actually be ahead and switch those. And certainly it is acceptable for you to do this. Before you go into planning your paragraphs, you should definitely think about the order in which you're building your essay. One of the requirements of the FSA essay is that you build a logical argument. So organization of your argument matters. I want to put my strongest point last, or I want my points to build off of one another into one really big point. So this is a good thing to remember. We're doing one of these every week. I don't need you to give me a whole completed planning sheet. I'm going to fill out every body paragraph here in my outline just because I'm going to show you how it's done. However, if you want to do your whole outline and turn it into me that way, then I'll give you some extra credit on it for having done the whole thing. But I'm only requiring that you fill out one of these body paragraphs. So you have to at least have this much and then give me the details of what you want to include in the body paragraph that you're actually going to be writing. Then, of course, after you finish your planning sheet, all I want you to submit to me is one body paragraph. You don't have to give me an intro, you don't have to give me a conclusion or any of the other body paragraphs, just give me one. So here we go. For the first point, it said history has taught us that important decisions should be undertaken when older. So remember, before I even go into any evidence from the article, I want to try and elaborate on my point first. So my elaboration could be my own idea here. Girls used to get married as young as 13. Like early American history, girls were getting married to much older men at a very young age. So when I go to explain this in my body paragraph, I can say, obviously, we've discovered that this isn't a good thing because right now it's pretty much illegal to marry a 13-year-old girl if you're a guy. So 18 is the age of majority here, where you would be able to decide who you're going to marry. So obviously it's important, or it was discovered to be important, that these girls be older when they get married. So that's something I might elaborate on before moving on to my first piece of evidence. And this would be really good on the FSA because any elaboration that comes from my own mind and not from the article, and yet is still on topic or relevant, is going to give me huge points in elaboration. They want to see that you've thought about the topic and that you haven't just taken the author's ideas and you're just restating them. For my evidence, I might use from the Davenport article that you can't join the military or serve on a jury until you're 18. And then the early American militia was likely less choosy. Okay, so that's what I was saying before when I was going through the evidence that early America, when they were fighting for, our independence, I'm pretty sure they probably had some teenagers fighting with them. Now, because I'm focusing on that, I might leave out that in the evidence here that they can't serve on a jury until they're 18. That doesn't really serve my purpose. So I might take that out and just say that they can't join the military when I go to actually write this, because I don't want to bring up something and then not discuss it. Teens can weigh pros and cons and reason logically is what the opposing side might say. And this counterclaim directly corresponds to my point. I'm saying that history has taught us that important decisions should be undertaken when older. The other side is going to argue that teens can weigh pros and cons and reason logically. That corresponds with the point I'm making. So this is a good counterclaim to bring up within this body paragraph. So my elaboration should somehow disprove this. I can give like an anecdote or an example here and just say students can be presented with a long list of cons for doing drugs. But some of them will still choose to do them with only one reason on the pro side, and that's simply the high you get from doing drugs. So in a long list of cons where there's only one pro, many students or many teenagers choose to still do it anyway. And that could be my counter argument to, or my refutation of this counterclaim. Now, I've discussed this in class, but I want to restate this. You want to try and weave a counterclaim into each of your supporting points. What is the other side going to argue back? And if you do that, you're going to get a higher score on this FSA than you would if you set aside a whole body paragraph for the counterclaim. Because then you're probably only addressing one of the things they would say and not everything they would say. It's better if you just up front and within every body paragraph address what the other side is going to argue. Okay, so for my next body paragraph, it says teens lack civic knowledge. So I want to elaborate on that before I provide some evidence. So I might give my own examples here. Teens can rarely name their governor or the branches of government and what their functions are, and they don't watch the news. Okay, those are my things that I might say, and those all come from me. They did not come from the passage. And then falling right into the same line of thought, I could provide evidence from Davenport where he says they don't know senator names or how to amend the Constitution. Okay, so that's evidence from Davenport. Then I could say some adults don't either. This is my elaboration. But adults planning to vote usually research the candidates. So I'll admit here, and I might even start that sentence off when I go to write my paragraph. I might say, admittedly, some adults don't know this information either. However, adults who plan to vote will usually research the candidates and do their due diligence. And we can't say the same about teenagers. They might just go and vote, without researching. Okay, so, and that was kind of the counterclaim there, where I admit that some adults don't know this stuff either. So I'm admitting a weakness in my own argument here. Now for my counterclaim, I might say these concerns aren't raised by Steinberg and other countries with lower voting age. Now what I mean by that, I'm going back to my main point here, that teens lack civic knowledge. When I was reading the Steinberg article, he did not say that there was a problem with these 16 and 17-year-olds in those countries voting. So that's something I would bring up here in my counterclaim, that Steinberg didn't really bring up that problem. And the evidence I would use is simply that, because I have to have evidence from both articles in every paragraph. If there were 3 sources, then I could just have 2. But I can't do a body paragraph with just one source. So if I just quote Davenport in a whole body paragraph, it's going to get marked down because I'm not then integrating the knowledge from multiple sources. So I need to bring something up from Steinberg. So I would say, he talks about Brazil, Argentina, and Austria and how they have a high voter turnout among the 16 and 17-year-olds. And so that's something I just might throw in there. Of course, it still matches my argument here. And for elaboration, then I could say, however, it's quite possible that the parents are voting through their children. So they know they might be telling their 16 and 17-year-olds what candidate to vote for or how to vote on certain issues. And then I can discuss the whole thing I was talking about when we were doing the My Thoughts section and how that would be really bad because then parents are getting a stronger vote than single people are because they don't yet have children who are old enough to vote the same way they're voting. So this could heavily influence elections and maybe come up with a non-accurate outcome. So that might be something I discuss as a result of this. And again, all of that came from me. Those are my ideas. So I'm just using the fact that they have a high voter turnout to kind of be the basis for my thoughts here. And I'm just elaborating on a possibility. So I would make sure at the end of this paragraph, because I'm going to get kind of sidetracked here saying that it's possible that parents are voting through them, and I want to make sure my last sentence touches back on that point, that teens lack civic knowledge. So I would go back and say possibly that the reason why it's such a strong possibility that parents are voting through them is because teens lack civic knowledge, that they don't pay attention to these things. Okay, and I want to make sure I'm always ending on my point too, so it's clear to my reader what point I was making in that body paragraph, in case they thought I got a little off topic. I want to make sure everything goes back to the point. So for my last point, reason for lowering the voting age, we would be seeing, people protesting in the streets. You would see picketing going on. You would see all these things, but there's not, because there's no strong reason to lower the voting age. My evidence. Last time the voting age was lowered was during Vietnam, and the argument was if you were old enough to fight, you were old enough to vote. When I elaborate on this, I'm going to say the reason that was such a strong reason to lower the voting age was because these 18-year-olds were being forced into going to battle, into going to the war. I'm pretty sure there was a draft going on at that point, and even if I'm wrong, these 18-year-olds were able to join the military and go die for their country. So if they're going to die for their country, shouldn't they have a say in which person is president? Because the president or whoever they're electing is pretty much deciding how much longer this war is going to go on. So elections at that time would definitely dictate the outcome of the war, which directly affected the 18-year-olds. So of course it would be important that they would be able to vote. And then for my counterclaim, obviously this is the only reason the other side says that we should lower the voting age. So opposition says the voting age should be lowered now because it would increase voter turnout. And then I need to elaborate on that and say people who vote for the first time, or the people who vote when they are first eligible to vote, are more likely to continue voting, according to Steinberg. Because remember, I have to have evidence from both articles. That's their reason why they think it would increase voter turnout, because there already is a higher turnout in these other countries. And then, of course, if they vote the first time they're eligible, it's more likely they'll continue voting. But when I elaborate on this, I'll say, while increasing voter turnout is a worthy cause, elections are too important to risk parents gaining extra votes through their children, giving families larger influence than singles. Teens are easily influenced by teachers and or peers, and they're less likely to make a decision alone. So if they're not voting the way their parents want them to vote, maybe they're voting the way their teachers want them to vote, or the way their friends want them to vote. They're less likely to be independent in their own thought process. So for this counterclaim, it can't really disprove that voter turnout would increase, because even the Davenport article didn't really say why he thought it wouldn't increase voter turnout. But I can say that yes, increasing voter turnout is something we would want. However, the risks I've already stated in paragraphs 1 and 2 make that likelihood not worth it. The risks outweigh the benefit. So I would want to explain that in that paragraph. So now I have 3 body paragraphs, the third one really building off of the first 2. CC, or at least I'm looking for CC when I grade it. I'm looking to see that you have the claim. What is the reason why you think the voting age should or shouldn't be lowered in this body paragraph? So give me that reason. I'm looking that you provide evidence, 1 from each source. So there's 2 points for evidence. I need to see 1 from each source. That you've cited your sources. Some of you guys are just writing the evidence in there as if it's your own thoughts, but you forget that I've read the passages too. So if you aren't attributing that sentence to the proper author, then basically that's plagiarism, and you need to not do that. So make sure you are citing your source, whether it's providing a parenthetical citation at the end or quoting it and making sure you say who said that. I'm looking for elaboration. So we have 2 pieces of evidence with citations, 1 from each source, and I'm giving 10 points for elaboration because that's really the focus of what I want you doing in this body paragraph, in any of the body paragraphs we're writing. Most students are marked down on elaboration on the FSA. So if we can improve our elaboration, we have a much higher chance of scoring higher. And then, of course, it would improve your writing in general, so it's something you want to do. And then I want to make sure you include the counterclaim in every body paragraph. So whatever body paragraph you're giving me, you should have a counterclaim that fits the point that you're making within that body paragraph. Now, the counterclaim doesn't have to come at the end of the paragraph. If you want to move it to the beginning of the paragraph or the middle of the paragraph, that's fine with me. But make sure you include the counterclaim and that you refute it. You say why we should still be on the side you took and not on the other person's side. Okay, so you can't just say the counterclaim and leave it at that, because then it sounds like maybe you've switched sides. I don't know. And then I had to mark you down. So make sure you actually refute the counterclaim in some way. So you guys are good. That's all you have to do in order to get full credit on this. So make sure you write your body paragraph following whatever outline you created.